Young love. We've all heard how it can be all-consuming, right? So powerful. But in a few rare, absolutely terrifying cases, it can actually be a motive for murder. Today, we're going to dig into 3 true stories where teenage obsession got twisted into something truly deadly. Let's find out what happens when passion turns poisonous.
Can you imagine hearing that? That was a real threat, made by a 15-year-old girl. It was a threat that, well, nobody really took seriously. Until it was way, way too late. It's such a chilling glimpse into a mind where fantasy and reality were about to just violently collide.
I mean, you look at the young women at the center of these cases, and on the surface, they're just high school students. But underneath, there was this toxic mix of jealousy and control just brewing and brewing. We're going to break down exactly how these poisoned passions led them to kill. All right, so for our first case, we're heading to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, back in 1991. This is the story of Lisa Michelle Lambert, a 19-year-old whose jealousy spiraled into this meticulously planned act of violence.
So let's meet the key players here. You have Lisa Lambert, who is in this super volatile relationship with a guy named Lawrence Yinkin. Now, when they briefly broke up, Lawrence spent some totally platonic time with 16-year-old Lori Sho. But here's the crazy part. All of Lisa's rage wasn't aimed at her boyfriend. Nope, it was aimed at Lori, an innocent girl who was in reality the true victim in this whole awful saga.
The logic here, I mean, if you can even call it that, is completely warped. After Lawrence brutally assaults Lori, Lisa's anger isn't directed at her abusive partner. No, it's aimed at the 16-year-old girl he just victimized. And instead of leaving him, what does she do? She gets back together with Lawrence, weaponizes a pregnancy, and focuses all of her violent obsession on destroying Lori.
And you can't even try to argue this was some crime of passion, something that just happened in the heat of the moment. No way. This timeline shows a methodical escalation. The harassment was relentless. We're talking threatening phone calls, a physical assault in public at a mall. So when Lori's family finally pressed charges, it wasn't a deterrent for Lisa, it was the final trigger. For her, that was the point of no return.
The crime itself was just so cold and calculated. First, the lure, a clever, unbelievably cruel trick to get Lori's mom out of the house. Then, the ambush. Lisa had actually told her accomplice, Tabitha Buck, they were just going to cut Lori's hair. But her plan was so much more sinister. In the end, though, despite her horrific injuries, Lori's final act was to make sure justice was served by whispering her killer's name.
So if that first case was all about this insane, jealous obsession, this next one, well, this one's about the danger of unchecked violent fantasies. We're now in New York's Central Park in 1997, where a privileged but deeply disturbed teenager turned her own dark thoughts into a horrifying reality.
So on one hand, you've got Daphne Abdella. Now, despite a life of luxury, she was described as angry, violent, and was an alcoholic by the age of 15. On the other hand, you have Christopher Vasquez, an anxious and depressed boy who was very, very easily led. In fact, our source material literally describes him as a sheep, who saw this defiant Daphne as a shining star.
And the thing is, none of this was a secret. Everyone could see the warning signs with Daphne. She was physically and verbally abusive to her own parents, so much so that her father had to get a restraining order against her. She was constantly ranting about wanting to hurt people, but because she was so young and because she'd made these threats before, nobody really believed she would actually do it. What happened to Michael McMorrow? It was just senseless, and the brutality was on a whole other level. They lured him to this secluded spot with the promise of a beer, and then they ambushed him. The attack was just an act of pure savagery, far beyond what was needed to kill him. That level of mutilation suggests a deep personal rage being unleashed on a near stranger. And this is where the story gets even more bizarre. Fearing she'd get caught, Daphne actually called 911 herself, reporting a body in the lake. When the police arrived, she calmly sat there eating macaroni and cheese while pinning the entire crime on Christopher. She led them to the body like she was just some concerned citizen, not one of the killers. All right, for our final case, we're heading to a high school goth clique in Illinois back in 2005. And here, another love triangle fueled by a teenager's obsessive need for control ends in betrayal and, well, butchery. Okay, so you really have to understand the dynamic here because it's everything. Sarah Cobb was the undisputed leader of this group. If she wasn't the center of attention, she'd just cut you out. Corey Gregory was her totally devoted follower, described as a puppy dog who would do anything for her. And then you have Adrienne Reynolds, the new girl just looking for friends and trying to fit in, who had no idea she was stepping right into the middle of their toxic relationship.
And that's exactly what this was about, pure, uncut jealousy. Sarah, as the leader, demanded Corey's complete devotion. So when Corey started a simple friendship with the new girl, Adrienne, Sarah's jealousy just exploded. She started spreading these vicious rumors, threatening Adrienne, and even wrote in her journal, "I'm going to kill the bitch."
The way this all went down is just horrifying. Sarah pretends she wants to make peace, tricking Adrienne into meeting up. The attack itself happens in broad daylight, in a busy restaurant parking lot. After Corey murders Adrienne, the crime just gets worse. They actually call in another friend, Nate, who is known for his dark fantasies, to dismember the body, because they thought it would help them hide what they did.
But listen to this. This is the part that just shows you how disconnected from reality they were. There was no panic, no guilt, no remorse. After doing something so heinous, they just calmly went to a fast food restaurant. That single detail speaks volumes about their profound and chilling lack of empathy.
So what happened to these lovesick killers? Let's take a look at the legal consequences for each one of these 3 brutal crimes.
You can see right here, the outcomes were all over the place. The leaders in the first and third cases, Lisa and Sarah, they got life or near-life sentences for first-degree murder, which makes sense. But look at that second case. Because of conflicting testimonies, Daphne, Abdella, and Christopher were convicted of the lesser charge of manslaughter. They only served 6 years for that brutal crime.
So when you look at all 3 of these stories side by side, you start to see these common threads emerge, right? This was never really about love. It was a toxic obsession with control and power. In every single case, you had a dominant, narcissistic leader manipulating these vulnerable followers to act on their violent fantasies. And maybe most disturbing of all, they all showed that same shocking lack of remorse, a key trait of psychopathy.
And really, if you want to understand the mindset here, you just have to listen to this quote from Sarah Cobb. "I felt nothing when she died." To feel nothing after orchestrating the murder and dismemberment of your friend, it's just a window into a mind completely devoid of empathy. It is the cold, dark heart at the center of all these stories.
And that's what we're left with, isn't it? The ultimate question. When you look at these young women, Lisa, Daphne, and Sarah, who committed such adult atrocities, you have to wonder, was it a darkness they were just born with? Or was it a product of their environment, their relationships, and the terrible choices they made? It's a question without any easy answers.